All right, one of the things you may want to think about long before you step in the woods is how to poop in the woods. 2.6 billion people around this planet lack adequate separation between human waste and their drinking water. And we as overlanders and outdoorsmen and women do not want to make that problem any worse. So there are some things we can do. First of all, we really need to think about what our role is and think about how we interact with the environment. So for overlanders, that's things like how many people are in your group? Are you doing a solo trip on a bicycle or a motorcycle, or maybe just with a couple of buddies? Are you taking 4 or 5 vehicles along with families of 3 and 4 where you might have, a dozen or more people? So how many people you're traveling with will influence what your toilet and options are in the backcountry. You also need to think about your environment. Are you going to be, let's say in the US, east of the Mississippi or west of the Mississippi? The environment will really impact how you take care of human waste. A duration of your trip is another factor. Are you going to be out for a single night or 2 nights? Or are you going to be gone for a week or more or multiple weeks while you're traveling around the country, around the world? So these are all things you'll have to think about as an overlander. So our 2 topics then are, one is a very short one, and that's doing number 1, urination. On average, most people will pee about 1.5 quarts a day under normal circumstances. We think of urine as being fairly sterile, and the best way to get rid of it is onto the ground. Peeing directly on the ground is the most recommended thing to do. The thing we all tend to want to do, at least guys, and that is pee on rocks or pee on plants and materials like that, because animals will find those salts attractive and may defoliate those plants. As far as defecation, number 2, on average, the average person defecates roughly 1.2 times a day, and that's about 1/4 pound of material per deposit. When you think about the dried weight there, roughly half of that is made up of bacteria. So there's good bacteria and bad bacteria in that, and we really want to keep that out of our waterways. And one of the ways we do that is to dig cat holes.
Each land management agency is going to have different rules depending where you are in the country, whether it's east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi. Know those rules because they can have a very negative effect on you when they come fine you, and they will fine you if you're doing the wrong things. So you want to keep an eye on that. There are different kinds of things. Now, if you don't have some type of toilet system, you're going to have to do this manually. Manually is pretty simple. The first way, the most common way, the way that's been around for a long time, is the use of a trowel. These trowels are kind of interesting, and depending on what area of the country, it is the most common thing to dig. People think they need to dig very deep latrines or something like that, and actually they found that the breakdown of the human waste happens very quickly if it's done in smaller deposits, so everyone doing something individually. Now, 6 inches is kind of the common known depth. These trowels are usually made with 6 inches of space, and you're going to make it about that deep and about that big around for where you're going to be burying it. These cat holes are pretty simple. East of the Mississippi, they're very common. Then the big thing that'll happen is paper. What are you going to do to wipe, in simple terms? Some areas of the country, they say there will be no paper. Other areas say you must carry out the paper. East of the Mississippi, a lot of locations, you can bury it if you bury it properly, and it needs to be the cheap stuff. It should have no color, it should have no scent, and so being very cheap, it's that stuff that you usually find in a department store or someplace, a public restroom, that really doesn't work, but that's the stuff you should really use. But as a general rule, plan on carry out if you're going to be doing any of that.
I was going to add one thing. What you don't want to do in almost any environment is try to burn that toilet paper. It's better, if you're going to bury it, it's better to mix it in, not with the trowel. Use a stick or something to try and kind of aerate that poo a little bit, and then pull the soil back over it and disguise it a bit too, so the next person's not coming to dig in that same spot.
If that space looks inviting to you, it will someone else, but they will not be real happy if you really disguise it. So putting a rock on it, putting something like that on it, so basically someone else is not going to dig it up, and it might avoid some animal incursion because they will tend to smell it and want to dig it up and find out what it is also. The land management agencies all have different rules in different areas. Many of the national parks, especially the national parks, have some very specific rules, and that means carrying out everything. This is a little difficult at times, but there are systems out there, and they're basically called WAG bags, waste alleviation gelling bags. These were originally kind of developed by the space program, and what these are they allow you to, it's got a double bag system in here, and you can read all the directions, but there is a material at the bottom of it that basically turns the waste into an inert gel, and it allows it to be then tossed into a trash can. You can carry it out and throw it, it'll go into a landfill. I have some personal issues with some of that and how it's managed and things, but as a general rule, that's the rules that they require. Areas like Mount Whitney, where they see 10,000 hikers a year, which means tons of waste, they do require this use. Many of the national parks are set up that way because of the amount of visitorship. Now, there are other things. If you're in an area that doesn't require WAG bags, you can still buy that powder, and it's called mini poo powder, and you can do that yourself as well as bearing it, as well as you can use it to build your own WAG bags in areas that will allow it. But know what that management agency's rules are. It can have a real dramatic effect on things.
Some other things to think about, especially for women, there are FUDs, female urinary devices, that give them the ability to relieve themselves from a standing position. So that's something that women may wish to think about. Again, carrying out your waste, that would also include tampons, sanitary pads, those types of things need to be carried out, not buried, not burned. So again, those are some female specific things. I'll tell you what, something that's awful nice to be able to use is a wet wipe when you're done. Again, wet wipes shouldn't be buried, they shouldn't be burned, they shouldn't be flushed. Those really need to be carried out and disposed of in the trash. Kind of that next level after dealing with things like WAG bags or making your own WAG bags, the next thing would be using one of the different types of toilets that are available on the market. There are toilets that are made to incorporate WAG bags, whether those are bucket style or these little folding stools that you can use as a toilet that the bag integrates into. And you can set those up in your camp or just outside of camp where people can use that for a period of a couple of days before the bags are full and need to be replaced. Other options include things like cassette toilets. Cassette toilets are very common in a lot of the campers you see, especially in a lot of the truck campers, where outwardly it appears to be a pretty traditional looking toilet and seat and cover. The flushing mechanism then dumps into a tank of anywhere from about 2 gallons up to 5 gallons. And in that tank, you would add a digester, a powder, or a fluid that helps break down both the solids and help alleviate the smell of when you have the mixed solids and liquids in that tank. The nice thing about cassette toilets is when they do get full, you can take those out, you can dump them in a porta-john, pit latrines, and if you're very careful, you can dump them into a regular household toilet and empty them that way. Always helps to rinse them back out then with a hose or something outside. They slide right back underneath the toilet, and you've got another 2, 3, 4 days for 2 people to use. Another type of toilet you're starting to see more commonly, it really had its origins in the sailing industry, is a composting toilet. So composting toilets can be a little bit bigger than cassette toilets. They're also a little more expensive, but they're unique in that they separate the urine from the feces. It's when you put those two together that they really develop the characteristic odor. So by separating them, they'll have a smaller tank on the front of the toilet that captures the urine that you can dump appropriately. And then in the main compartment where the poo goes, the feces goes, they'll have a biological medium of some sort, such as like a sphagnum moss or a peat moss, that type of material. And as you do your business in there, you give the toilet a crank or two. It helps aerate that, and it helps let a very natural aerobic process to breaking down those waste. Those toilets a lot of times will also have a bit of a forced airflow through them with a small fan that kind of keeps air moving through that biological medium and helps reduce the smell. So those are your 2 kind of fundamental toilets. And there are also the typical toilets you see in big RVs that have big holding tanks that have to be dumped at a dump station. So those are kind of your major types of toilets you can find, and things certainly worth investigating. Some other issues to think about when it comes to human waste is what to do with your food waste.
Food waste is a big issue because it has a number of factors involved, and it can create problems in major campgrounds, let alone where you are. One of the struggles with the food waste is it will attract animals. The best rule of thumb is eat everything. Americans tend to basically take too much food. And so what happens is you want to take less and then supplement it with other pieces, parts, so you don't have that food waste. Learn how to manage it according to, again, the area that you're going to be in. Learn how to hang a bear bag. There's lots of information out there on bear bags. All kinds of vermin can be attracted by human food waste. Human food is not good for animals, and that's why campgrounds have a lot of problems with them. So dealing with this food waste, it should not be buried, it should be disposed of in appropriate trash cans. Sometimes it looks convenient to hang those items in bags off the back of your vehicle. Depending on where you are, you could attract a lot of trouble.
And speaking of animals, you also need to pick up after your pets, whether you're in the back country or in the front country. The nice thing about pet waste is you can put that in those little baggies you can find all over the place, and that can go directly in the garbage as is. So pick up after your pets too. To kind of wrap things up, there are really 4 things I think you really need to remember. Number 1 is minimally you are obligated to follow the regulations of whatever land management agency you're dealing with, whether it's the Park Service or the National Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, wherever you're traveling. 2, you really need to take into consideration your environment, whether you're in the east where there's a deep organic layer to the soil where burying waste works very well, to the west where the soils are much less organic on the top layers. It's a much drier environment. There are lots of specialized ways you can deal with waste in those environments. Third, you really need to discuss with people you're traveling with how you as a group want to deal with your waste. And the 4th thing is probably the most important. You want to protect that wilderness experience for the next traveler to come along. So those are the things you really need to concentrate on as you think about how to deal with human waste.
You don't have to be afraid of basically doing number 2 in the backcountry. What you need to do is you need to make sure you understand how to do it. There's a lot of bad information out there. The most current information is going to be with the land management agencies. Find out the best way you should be managing what you're doing and do what you have to do.